Hi everyone, and just welcome. Just having everyone admitted to the call or the webinar. So, and I can see that you're all joining online, and you've turned your mics and cameras off, which is brilliant. I might just pop up the slide. Oh, and somehow I've turned my video off. Oops. Um, Annie, apparently you've disabled my video too. Thank you. All right, what I might do is I might just jump on and share my PowerPoint because then I think it's really nice as everyone joins the meeting that they know that they're in the right place and it's the right topic. So let me just set that up. There we go. And I always feel a lot more comfortable once I've got my PowerPoint in front of me so that I don't run badly over or bombard you with too much information. Anyway, welcome to Natural Medicine Week. This is our 9th Natural Medicine Week that we're celebrating. And I've been involved with this from the get-go because I was on the board and chair of the marketing committee when we developed this concept. And in the early stages, we had a few little events in people's clinics and other things, and it gradually built and built to where it is today. But it's been through some interesting derivations because in 2000 and late 2019 we had over 50 events that people were running, and then in March 2020 we had to pivot everything to online, which was a bit of a challenge, but actually I think gives us the opportunity to reach a lot more people because it's a lot easier for a lot of people to actually attend an event during their lunch hour, or if they're remote or regional, they can access it on a webinar. So I do think that's been a bit of a plus. Now, if you've got any questions, um, please just pop them in the meeting chat. You can see a couple of people have already done that. And if you could also just let me know where you're joining us from, because, it's always my goal to have as many areas as possible joining us. But I think last year I had a webinar where I had people from like up in northern Queensland all the way down to Tasmania. Oh, and Annie's in Fremantle, so we're really stretching the countryside. Gold Coast, welcome Chelsea, Adelaide. Oh, that's fantastic. Deniliquin, hope I said that right. Hope you're not underwater. I think that's up Northern Rivers area. So, as long as your internet holds up, but we are recording the meeting today. So if there's a problem, oh, you're in Drought Riverina. Okay, sorry, wrong region. I think I'm thinking more up towards Byron, etc. Anyway, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. So today I'm going to be talking about naturally increasing your health span, not just your lifespan. And I think the thing is, over the last 100 years, because of the wonders of modern medicine, we've actually seen a big increase in people's lifespan. But unfortunately, for a lot of people, that last extra, you know, 15, 20 years isn't necessarily a health span. So I want to get people in a state where they're ready to retire, travel the world and enjoy their lives, be able to, I always think about when I'm going to Pilates, it's like, I'm not there to be thin. I'm there because I want a really great old lady body where I can pick my grandkids up from the floor. Although the way things are going, I'll probably have grand fur babies, not necessarily grandkids. But anyway, I've got a couple of pseudos in a niece and a nephew. Now, just a little bit about me. So I'm actually a naturopath and nutritionist. I'm based in Sydney, in St Ives, and I have been in practice for, I figured it out the other day, about 19 years. And clearly, my passion is for healthy aging at the moment because it's kind of, well, it's an age and stage thing, as you can see from the silver hair. I decided to stop dyeing the hair during COVID because I couldn't get into a hairdresser, and then actually it's a lot easier and a lot less maintenance. So I did find that was a really one of the few positive outcomes. Now, the other thing I was going to share with you was that I have been on the ATMS board for a number of years, heavily involved in developing Natural Medicine Week and a number of other initiatives, and I was actually president for the last year. And now I represent ATMS on another board which focuses on small business advocacy called COSBOA. So in April, I actually got to attend the Treasurer's debate and ask a question about tax reform. So, something that you don't expect most naturopaths to be interested in, but the organisation is actually focusing on trying to lower taxes for small business people, because I think, if you're a small business owner, everyone else gets paid before you do. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about today was really focusing on some simple changes you could make to really support healthy aging. And so what I'm going to look at is 4 foods that sort of highlight the key things I'm looking for in the diet. I'm going to look at 4 ways to improve your brain health, simple things that you can do. You may be doing some of them already. And also, I'm going to talk about a couple of supplements for brain health as well, or a couple of my favorite supplements. It's not necessarily something that works for everyone. Now, what I was going to say was, the other thing is, I really want you to get out of this webinar what I would expect most people to get out of what I would normally expect to get out of an event, which for me is taking out 1 or 2 things that really I can implement in practice, or for you, implement in your lifestyle and actually see some improvement. So if you do make those changes and you do get that benefit, what I'd love you to do is drop me an email. I'll share my details at the end of this, but it's christine@elementalhealth.net.au, and let me know what of these things actually made a difference for you. Now, just give me 1 second, because it's a bit cold and damp in Sydney, and I had the heater on, which is now proving to be a little bit too much heat for me. All right, so hopefully you're all comfortable and you've got some time available and you can actually pay attention to this. But as I'm going through, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat so that I can come to them at the end, because I don't know about you, but certainly as we get a bit older, sometimes you think about something you really want to know the answer to, and then by the time we get to the end and I say, have you got any questions, you go, oh, I did. I had a really good question. I just can't remember what it was. So we will be talking about some supplements for memory, but I think probably the easiest thing is just pop it on the chat on the way through. All right, let's start by talking about some lovely foods for brain health. So for me, 2 of the things that I often look at are nuts and fish. Now, you're probably wondering why I put these 2 together, but there's a common theme with both of these, which they are both really good sources of good fats. And when I'm talking about fish, I'm talking, buy the best quality fish you can afford, and, make sure that you actually, if you can get, wild caught salmon or fish, brilliant. If you can't, just then know that you're getting as many nutrients as possible from it. So the thing I like about fish is, 1, it's a great source of protein. 2, it's got some really beneficial fats in it. And people talk about omega-3s, but they're really important for brain health, because the brain, if you think about the brain, it's kind of, coated in this white substance, which is actually good fats. So if you feed your brain good quality fats, you're maintaining that membrane and supporting it to be really effective. So it's really important that you actually have enough good fats in your diet, because if you don't, that membrane is not protecting your brain, and it potentially allows, viruses and bacteria to enter when they shouldn't, which can, introduce other risks, but it also makes it much harder for your brain to function. So the other thing about fats is they form what they call a sheath around a lot of our nerves, so that actually the nerves signal can be conducted really quickly and effectively. So they call that the myelin sheath. Now, in conditions like MS, that starts breaking down and creating pain where there's breaks in the signal. So it is really important to make sure you're having good fats for your overall brain health, but also to protect your brain. So I think low-fat diets are probably one of the worst things for brain health, and also particularly for women's brains, because good fats are also important to manufacture the hormones. And as we get a bit older and we have lower levels of naturally occurring hormones, you want to support them as best you can. Now, the other thing is, I'm a big fan of including a regular serve of nuts and seeds in the diet. And when I say a serve, I mean enough to cover 3 fingers. So that's about 10 almonds. Doesn't sound like a lot, but I did have one guy where I was working with him on weight loss, and he kept having, like, I told him to have a snack of nuts and seeds when he was hungry. He understood the serving size, but he interpreted that as every time he felt hungry, he should have a snack of nuts and seeds. So after, I think, 4 weeks, we redid his parameters and he hadn't lost any weight. Turns out he'd been having 5 snacks a day. So that was a little bit more than I thought was appropriate, and probably added quite a few more calories. And also, I suspicion he was scooping it up. So, a small snack of nuts and seeds. I mean, basically, a nut is everything a tree needs to grow. So they're just jam-packed with nutrition. They've got the benefit of the good fats, but they've also got the benefit of things like zinc and other nutrients, which is often really hard to get from other sources. So I do find including that on a regular basis is really helpful. And there is some research to show that men who had nuts regularly versus those who didn't had better cardiovascular outcomes. So there we can see one measure, which is a really critical one, which is heart health, where they're actually having a benefit from having nuts on a regular basis. Now, the 2 other things I've got here, eggs and berries, and not necessarily going to talk about these two together. But in terms of foods for brain health, the reason I include the picture of the eggs, which has been served on a lovely, a little bit of prosciutto with asparagus, is that eggs are a great protein. So protein is really critical, particularly as we get older, because basically the body is really efficient at using protein. It recycles about 96% of it, but we're constantly using it as we shed skin and hair and other things. So, there's a loss that we need to make up each day. It's also really important for repair, and protein is used to make a lot of our messengers, like chemicals, hormones, all these sort of things. So if you want to be really miserable and depressed, go on a really low protein diet, because things like serotonin, etc., need enough protein to be formed. So I included the eggs here as a marker for protein, because the egg is actually considered the perfect protein source. Now, if you're vegan, I apologize for this picture, but it is a really useful, it's the protein that all other proteins are measured against. And often what I say is, if you are looking at how much protein is enough for you in your diet, once you're over 50, the levels actually increase a bit. So you need to be eating enough protein. So it's basically, the maths is 1.2 grams per kilo of desired weight. So let's say you want to be 60 kilos. I'm not looking at what your weight is at the moment, but if you are doing 1.2 grams, you'd need to be eating 72 grams of protein a day. Now, that doesn't sound like very much. And you probably go, oh, well, the average egg weighs, 50 grams. So I'm going to get there really easily. Well, it's actually not that easy, because the average egg only has about 6 grams of protein. So most protein sources from animals are about 20 to 25% actual protein. So it's about a quarter of what you're eating. The rest of it is like us. It's water and it's fiber and it's other things. So to get enough protein for the average woman, you're looking at probably 2 eggs for breakfast, a small can of tuna at lunch, and a chicken breast fillet at dinner. So it is actually a reasonable amount of protein for most people. And what I tend to use is the rule of palm. So if your palms, not my palms, look at your palm and just the palm and not the fingers, and look at the size and the thickness. That's the amount of protein you need to be having with each meal. So it's going to be different if you're a big man versus a small woman, because, your palm tends to vary in size with that. And I think the other thing I'd like to point out with this slide is I've included some asparagus and berries. So even though I said I was going to talk about 4 foods for brain health, you're going to get a bonus, because asparagus is a really good fibrous vegetable that feeds a lot of beneficial bacteria in your stomach. So again, if I had the ideal balance with people's diets to support them for healthy aging. It's palm size, palm thickness piece of protein, plus 3 handfuls of vegetables at least 2 meals a day. So think about that and actually have a look and see how many cups of vegetables you're having, and think about it. And we'll discuss this a bit at the end. So it's cups of veggies is one measure. Now, I also included the picture of the berries. And I love including berries in the diet because they're a great source of a lot of phytochemicals, particularly polyphenols, which are found in all the purple colored ones, and some of the red ones as well. But, I think of blueberries and blackberries in particular. So there's not a lot of other foods that bring those nutrients to the table. They're also really readily available. And frankly, even though I've got a photo here, which is of the fresh ones, I usually recommend that people look at frozen as well, because I often find they're really much more cost effective. Because I don't know about you, but I was in this Harris Farm the other day, and they actually had, really well priced raspberries, but they were like, normally they're about, $8 for a tiny 125 gram punnet. And if you don't eat it within 2 days, it's gone moldy. Whereas when you get the frozen ones, you get kilo for about $12. And that will last you a lot longer and maintain, because it's been frozen when it's been near where it's been harvested, it's usually maintaining good nutrient quality. And I find it's a much more affordable way to access them. The other thing I really like about berries, again, is they're good fiber in them. And you can actually see it in the strawberries, the little seeds on the outside. And so that fiber, again, is really good for feeding our beneficial bacteria in our stomachs. So I think that's a really important source of nutrients for good gut bugs. And generally with fruit, I'm looking for people to have probably between 2 to 3 serves a day. So a serve would be half a cup of berries, or 2 small apricots, or an apple or a pear, or something like that. So, think about when you include it. And look, one of the good things to do can be pairing up. Sorry, it's a bad pun. But, have the pear with the nuts, or the apple with the nuts, because then that combination of adding more fiber to the good fats will help you feel full for longer. And, that really assists your brain health as well. And I suppose that's the other point in terms of just circling back to the protein and having enough protein at every meal. Protein is really important for maintaining blood sugar. So you get a long, slow release of energy, and that helps fuel your brain. So your brain is a really greedy bugger, really. And it uses a lot of the glucose in the body. So even though it only weighs about, I think, 3 kilos, it uses close to 30% of the energy in the body. So it is important to keep it properly fueled. And if you want to do a little bit of an experiment, try flipping a day around and seeing how having basically dinner for breakfast works. So, one of my quick, easy breakfasts is I get this beautiful pesto from Harris Farm, which is gluten and dairy free, but it's a really nice combination. And I have that on gluten-free toast with smoked trout. And I feel like I'm really energized for 4 or 5 hours, and my brain is very clear. And it's also a really tasty combination because I'm also bringing in a little bit of nuts and some greens there as well. Now, you could do that. You could add other things to it, but it is interesting to see when you do have a good quality breakfast with a good serve of protein, how much better you feel in terms of your energy and how much clearer your thinking is. Because I do think that's one of the other things. The symptom that brings people in to see me most often is this feeling as though they're experiencing brain fog. They're finding it hard to think clearly. They're searching for words, and that's starting to worry them because maybe they've got a relative or a family member who's suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia, and they start to think that maybe is coming down the pipeline at them. Now, the next part I wanted to cover, and I'm just being conscious of the time, so I'm just going to touch on some of these things and then perhaps direct you for a few resources so that you can get a bit more information. So we're going to look at 4 ways to improve brain health. And I'm really pleased to tell you that you're already doing one of them, which is fantastic. So learning something new. So you can see it's on the right of my screen. Pretty sure it is on yours too. But on the right of my screen, there's a woman sitting there clearly studying or doing a test or something. And really learning something new or working on learning new things is a great thing for improving the neuroplasticity of your brain and actually helping rewire more connections. The benefit of that is the more connections, that if something in the brain isn't working as well, it can find another way around to access that information. So I like to think of the brain as about a ball of wool. And so you're building all these pathways around it. Now, I would usually say if you're looking at, learning something new or doing something like brain gym, I think it's Brain HQ that has a really good online brain training program, but what you need to focus on is the things you're not good at. So, for example, if you're looking at doing puzzles on a daily basis, if you're really great at doing crosswords, you probably don't need to be doing more crosswords. Just do the crosswords for enjoyment. What you do need to be doing is looking at something like Sudoku. So if maths is your challenge, then that's an area that's actually going to, I think, create a bit more stress for your brain, but it will also really help it train that neuroplasticity, those new pathways, and develop it. So it could be, so today actually attending a webinar and learning about something new, which is brain health, is a good way to help keep building that neuroplasticity. So perhaps give yourself a goal to go through all the recordings that are on the Natural Medicine Week website over the next, month or two and see what else you can learn from that information. Now, it could be learning something new. There's a lot of benefit to, and perhaps if I was looking at activities, some of the ones that are really beneficial are dancing. So, because in dancing, one, you've got the benefit of movement, but you're also learning new patterns and routines. So that is really beneficial. The other one is learning a language. Again, this is a really great workout for your brain. And, you can also tie it up with I've always wanted to go to Spain or Italy. And so being able to speak some of the language is a major benefit. Now, I've mentioned exercise with dance. One of the, so if you look at the little guy, the little brain doing its gym work, it's amazing how much research is coming out now on the benefits of movement for a range of things, whether it's walking 40 minutes a day, 5 times a week is trialing to be as effective as being on an antidepressant. So something can be that powerful. Can you imagine what it can do for your brain health overall, but also your grandma body, so you can get up off the floor and pick up your grandchildren. And when I'm looking at exercise, I'm looking at 3 different types of exercise. And I've actually got a blog on the ATMS page about movement to support a healthy brain. And what I would suggest is, if you look at the 3 types of exercise, you've got strength, you've got cardio, you've got flexibility. Now, what I tend to find is men tend to prefer doing, they're happy to be in the gym and do the strength training. What they tend to resist is the flexibility. With women, they're often doing a lot of cardio. They might be doing walking. They might be doing other forms of aerobic exercise, but they really don't want to pick up those weights in the gym. Or even something like reformer Pilates would actually be considered strength training as well. But it's really important to maintain that muscle mass as we age for reasons other than just being able to get up and down out of a chair. That muscle mass also helps us maintain really good blood sugar. And it actually acts almost as an organ in its own right in terms of its signaling. So recently I saw a study that said that for men, which was only done on men because, this is an ongoing problem. I won't get into my rant about that. But men who did strength training, 2 to 3 sessions a week of strength training for 2 years reversed about 20 years of cardiovascular damage. So again, really powerful changes from something, I always think move it or lose it. So hopefully I've given you some motivation to look at adding some form of movement to your day. And I would say if you haven't been doing regular exercise, it's really important, particularly if you're a little bit older, to go low and go slow. Because this is one of the things I find is if people launch into, they may have the muscle memory of being able to swim 2 kilometers a day, but if they go out into the ocean and try to swim 2 kilometers, they're probably not going to be able to do it, and they're going to get themselves into all sorts of trouble. So, if it's walking that you start with, then start with doing a lap of the block. And then as you feel better, do 2 laps of the block and build it up from there. So, build up gradually so that you don't want to push yourself. Like, what's the definition of pushing yourself too hard? Well, if you get up the next day and you're achy and inflamed, you've probably done too much. So you need to kind of keep challenging yourself, but not try and blast through. Unfortunately, as we do get a bit older, that's probably not the best strategy. Now, the other thing is, in terms of brain health, doing flexibility and balance work is really great for, so things like you would do like yoga or Pilates really helps both sides of our brain and that neuroplasticity and wiring. So, there are multiple benefits in terms of brain health for our overall from just exercising. And as I said, ideally what I want people to be doing is a combination of strength, cardio, and flexibility. So have a think about that and what that would look like for you, and whether, based on what you're doing at the moment, there is something else you should add. So at the moment, I usually walk 6,000 to 8,000 steps most days. So that's my cardio. And for it to be cardio, it needs to be at a pace where I can walk but not sing. I do 2 reformers sessions on Pilates a week, which is the strength work. And I've recently taken up ballroom dancing, which has been interesting. And I had done dancing in my teenage years and then as a young adult, but I have great muscle memory. Unfortunately, I have been pushing it a little bit. And sometimes I have had mornings where I've woken up very sore and achy, and my colleague, who's an osteopath, gets me on the table and says, "What have you been doing to yourself?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'll just push through." But I would encourage you not to push through, just build up slowly. But I am finding the dancing is really good for just generally, it's a lot of fun and we spend a lot of time laughing. So I would say the other thing that motivates me to exercise is finding something I enjoy. And so, it might be find a buddy when you go for a walk or go to Pilates. So I started doing Pilates because a girlfriend of mine booked me into a class. 2 years later, I'm still going and she's dropped out. Anyway, a couple of other things that I've mentioned that I thought were really important with brain health. So the first one is, as much as possible, reducing inflammation. So what do I mean by inflammation? Because it's a word that gets used a lot. And basically, there is a lot of thinking at the moment about we don't so much age as inflame. So as you think about it, if you banged your knee really hard against a table and it got all red and puffy, so that's inflammation in the body. So, and usually it's a useful process because it's designed to deal with an injury, bring fluid to the site and actually allow you to heal. And because that fluid would come with nutrients and other things so that it could repair. However, if our body has got stuck in that inflammatory stage, it may then just continue with this process and it's no longer useful. So how do you deal with, inflammation? So if you do have injuries, it's important to, treat them appropriately, do the rehab, work through that process, whether it's a sprain or strain, and you follow RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And, if you are inflamed, use appropriate anti-inflammatories. And that could be, the whatever your doctor or physio suggests, or alternatively, it could be looking at some lovely herbals. Things like turmeric and your omega-3s can be really helpful. The other thing I would say is have a look at your diet and make sure that your diet isn't inflammatory for you. Again, if you wake up feeling pretty average, it's probably a sign that there's something in your diet that is not supporting you. And what I would encourage you to do is really follow a low inflammation diet for a few days and see if you notice the difference. Now, I've given you a link to a Better Brain Health recipes at the end of this. And so this would be the sort of plan that you could follow for a few days and see if you notice the difference. You can also work with a naturopath or a nutritionist and actually do some testing to see what foods are inflammatory for you. I have a form of testing I use in clinic, which I find really helpful. And it's just based on a hair test, which I know sounds a bit interesting, but I've used a lot of other testing, and I've found this is really helpful because it gives people a list of foods they can eat, and it seems to settle inflammation down quite quickly. So I think that is a really important part of it. I mean, most people who have rheumatoid type of issues like arthritis and stuff know that some foods like tomatoes and the nightshade family can be inflammatory for them. But what I've found, having done hundreds of these other tests, is it can be different foods for different people, and it's not always the obvious things. So sometimes they can be like, I know something in my diet is not sitting well with me, but I don't know what it is. And it can be because you're having a combination of things. So the first time I did this testing, chicken and avocado came up for me. And that was a little odd. But because, you think of those as both being really healthy foods. But I did find cutting them out, doing the gut work and repairing, I could bring them both back into the diet, although I have to admit I'm still not that enthusiastic about avocado. But I did notice really significant changes to my overall health through that period. Now, the other really significant shift you can make for your brain health is sleep. And because good quality sleep is really important for repair, reducing inflammation. Literally, the brain has a system called the glymphatics, which is lymphatics with a G on the front of it. But that glymphatics actually allows your brain to clear out waste and other material overnight, but it happens while you're asleep. So if you don't get good sleep, or if you have a lot of broken and interrupted sleep, it can really affect the amount of clearance that's happening, and so that you can get a lot of plaque and waste material building up in the brain. Now, there are a lot of other benefits to good sleep. It's anti-inflammatory, as I mentioned. It really helps you maintain your energy or improve your energy. You definitely feel better, because I know that the first 3 months with a young child, I think probably I had the worst mood I'd ever had, because I don't do well with sleep deprivation. And also it helps reset your circadian rhythm. So the other thing that can be really useful for people is to actually spend some time getting up with the sun and going to bed with it, and actually really using that circadian rhythm to actually put yourself in a good state. Now, for a lot of people, as you go through, as you get older, and particularly for women when they go through perimenopause and menopause, you often find that you think your sleep is a lot lighter. And what I would say is that we tend to have, you had it on a graph, there's kind of 4 peaks and troughs as we sleep, light sleep to deeper sleep. And what tends to happen is all of those periods would be below the line, as in conscious wakefulness, when we're under 50. As we get older, that line kind of comes down a bit, and there can be periods where we're awake. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're having worse sleep. It may just feel like we're having worse sleep. And one of the things I find is the most important thing about it is not to stress about it, but also to set yourself up so that you're actually in a good state to actually, to sleep well as much as possible. And in my online program, I talk a lot about sleep and how to improve sleep, because I think it is one of the biggest things for people in this environment. And I was going to say, unfortunately, one of the worst things is this, which unfortunately the light and the stimulation, you really need to avoid that for at least 2 hours before bedtime, because otherwise your brain's been rewired to be awake, and you're going to find it really difficult to sleep. Also, because personally, I've got those emails at 9:30 at night, and then I've just chewed about them all night. So that's not a good thing either. So, if you can put your phone somewhere, put it in the charger, put it as far away from you as possible, and don't have it in the room buzzing and binging overnight, because that's also not helpful. Now, I did mention that I had this download. If you're interested in looking at how to put a plan together with healthy snacks, enough protein to really support brain health, and it's on my website. So it's christinepopenutritionist.com/better brain health recipes, but you're probably better off just Googling those topics and getting to the Better Brain Health Recipes download. And for the people who are on this call today, or listening to the recording, I'm going to give away a free copy of my Aging Outrageously program, which is the 8 weeks of content on how to age really well, to one of the people who downloads this recipe. So there's potential for 2 bonuses with this. And so have a look. I did include the picture from my One Pan Meals download because it's really pretty, and it's also got this range of colors and the right amount of, 3 good handfuls of vegetables for each person. So have a look at that download and see if there's some recipes there that you like. I use meal planning software called That Clean Life in Clinic, and I find it really helpful because it's got about 6,000 recipes and I can sort them on gluten-free, dairy-free, vegetarian. I don't eat avocado. I don't eat this. I don't like that. And so it's really easy to build healthy meal plans for people. The other tip I would have for you to make things easier and to spend less time thinking about what you're eating, because now I'm just looking at this, I'm feeling hungry, is that wherever possible, cook extra and have leftovers for lunch the next day. Because, if you're really focusing on that protein and a good quantity of vegetables, that works really well and also saves you time and energy. So, that's probably just one other thing I would do for my brain health and to support my brain to actually have a little less clutter and stress. So speaking of that, I think the other thing I said at the start was I was going to talk about a couple of supplements that I find really helpful. And I'm probably going to go with one that's really boring and one that I've only used in the last few years. So the first one is a really good multivitamin. So B vitamins across the spectrum. Mainly because most people, as we get a bit older, we tend to digest less of the foods. And so to get the nutrients out of the food, we need to make sure that we're supporting all the pathways to break down food, detox food, etc. And when you come back to it, everything's about B vitamins. So a good quality B multi, whether it's an over-the-counter brand like, Blackmore's, I think Metagenics is now available online as well. There are other options out there, but I usually look for around 25 to 50 milligrams of the key B vitamins. And I really find that supports you improving energy production from food. So you will feel more energized. Now, the only other thing is, if you have problems with sleep, please take this in the morning. Do not take a B multi before bed and improve your energy production before you go to sleep. Now, the second one I would suggest is a supplement called SPM. And it's called SPM because the name's really long. It's called Specialized Pro-Resolving Mediators. So it's a bit of a mouthful. And basically what it is that, for a long time in clinical practice, I found that we were often recommended to give people, omega-3s, and I wouldn't see a big shift in them very quickly with it. I would in some people, but not in others. And so over time, what they found was that people needed an omega-3 index of about 8% for them to be able to successfully access the benefit of taking the omega-3s. Now, to get people to that level usually involve quite high dosing for quite a decent period of time. And what happened when they got to that point was they could then they then develop it down the pathway of these specialized pro-resolving mediators. So instead, a couple of companies have now produced a separate supplement, or one with the omega-3s and the SPMs in it, so that you can actually benefit from this anti-inflammatory impact quite quickly. Now, to give you an idea about how much fish you would need to be eating, the one time when I actually managed to have a really anti-inflammatory impact myself, I had a can of tuna for lunch every day for 6 weeks. And my skin looked amazing at the end of it, but I couldn't stand tuna for about 5 years after that. So, probably not the best strategy. So if you're going to eat fish, I would definitely recommend you mix it up and probably don't just do canned tuna. But I did find I could really see the benefit of having that good quality omega-3 intake. And I felt really good, really energized and no aches and pains. So look, I've used SPMs post-surgery to actually get myself off a lot of painkillers really quickly. So I have seen that they are really beneficial. I wouldn't get someone to use them pre-surgery though, because if you're being given a whole bunch of other medications, you need to manage that quite carefully. So I would do that with a practitioner. All right, so two supplements to consider: multi-B, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you are taking one already. And the other one is the SPM. So I think there's a couple of brands that have it out there at the moment. Now, this is just my details in terms of social staying, if you've enjoyed the presentation today and you want to just follow and see what else I'm offering. My Facebook is at Elemental Popey, although if you basically put Christine Pope, naturopath and nutritionist into Facebook, you'll find me as well. I do love my social media because, it's been really a very useful way to help build practice and also share information about improving health with a lot of people. I have an Instagram page as well, which is at All About Natural Medicine. My email is christine@elementalhealth.net.au. I have to say it is the world's longest address, but unfortunately that was the name of the clinic. So Elemental Health, and we didn't get the .com address. So you can imagine there's often a few challenges. And I also have a standalone blog, christinepopenutritionist.com, which has over 100 blogs on it. So there's a lot of the information we've discussed today will be there with more detail about it. So, jump on and have a look at that information. Now, I thought, given that we've got a bit of time, I would then look to see if there were any questions. So let me just jump into the chat. All right, I can see Sydney, Canberra, Manly. Good alternative for those with nut allergies. Okay, so depends on whether you have a nut allergy to, so we were talking about nuts and seeds earlier in terms of food. I would also look at whether seeds were an option. So that can be one option. The other thing is that, they are jam-packed with nutrients, but there are other things that are also a good source of zinc, for example, like oysters and red meat. So, sometimes if you've got a really strong allergy, you need to work around and have a look at those other food groups. And occasionally you just need to look at supplements, unfortunately. There are some vegan alternatives for the good fats that are found in fish and nuts. There's a brand called PhytoLove, and there's a product called sea buckthorn. And sea buckthorn is a plant, so less likely to be allergenic from that perspective if you've got a seafood allergy or you've got a nut allergy. All right, and and Jenny shared that she loves doing weights, not cardio. Okay, Jenny, then probably the challenge for you is to add a couple more options with, a little bit of strength work. And pickleball. Okay, now someone else has mentioned the value of pickleball. Pickleball is basically like a version of tennis, but played on a smaller court. And I've actually had a couple of older clients, particularly men, whose goal when they came to see me was that they were recovering from surgery and they wanted to be able to get back to pickleball. I have managed to get them both there. And yes, Louise, taking Avo out was a little bit challenging initially. All right. Now, Jenny's asked if we should all take vitamin B. Look, I don't think there's any one size fits all, and I am a fan of test, don't guess. But generically, I think, it is important. I would actually suggest if you can check at a minimum your iron and B12 levels before you start taking supplements. Consistently, I find people's B12 is pretty low, and I would usually like it higher. There are other tests you can do as well, but I do find, I'm usually when I'm looking at a case, I'm looking to see if that person's energy is low and they're eating or overeating and they don't seem to be getting the nutrition out of the food that they should before I suggest taking a B vitamin. I mean, look, most of the time, B vitamins are a water-soluble vitamin, so the excess will be excreted. The only thing you need to be concerned about, and Maria's mentioned this, oh, this is great. I should just read through all the questions and, you guys are answering them for me. B6 toxicity when taking vitamins. I think that some people, they do not process B6 particularly well, and they may need another form. However, I think for most people, it's not a problem. But what I would say is one of the problems with vitamins and minerals is that a lot of the symptoms of excess are the same as deficiency. So that can make it hard. And that's why you need to do some testing around it to see, do you have trouble processing that particular form of B vitamin? Now, generally speaking, I wouldn't be concerned about B6 toxicity under about 60 milligrams a day. And so I would just suggest if you are taking a number of self-prescribed supplements, you go and grab some and here we go. And just have a look at the back and and see whether there is any additional B6 in there in addition to the other things you're taking, because often B6 will be added to a magnesium supplement. It might be in your multivitamin, it might be in something else. So just be really conscious of how much you're taking. All right, tuna. Jenny's mentioned tuna, big fish, and mercury. It's really interesting with this whole heavy metals thing because I do a lot of testing in clinic around minerals and heavy metals. And one of the things I find is that under 50, people tend to have higher aluminium. Over 50, it tends to be higher mercury. And I don't think it's from eating fish. Actually, there was a French researcher who said that if you've got a mouthful of old fillings, you may be, and old fillings that are damaged, not, they're stable. You can be leaking up to 15 micrograms of mercury a day from the fillings, whereas eating fish, which is contaminated, so it doesn't mean all fish is contaminated, can actually be about 2 micrograms a day. Now, the other thing I noticed with fish is it comes with the iodine and selenium in the fish that actually helps you mobilize out those heavy metals too. But general principle is, if possible, go for smaller fish. They call it smash, which is, I don't know whether it's smaller fish. I think it's herrings and a few other, and sardines. And I've only ever once had fresh sardines that I thought was amazing, and the rest of the time, not so much. All right. Getting enough protein in a vegetarian diet from Maria. Okay. So Maria, if the rule of palm is 1 palm for someone who's eating animal-based protein, it's 2 for a vegetarian diet. And I would also make sure that your digestion is working well. If you're getting reflux or bloating or flatulence, possibly your digestion isn't working as well, and you really need to support that. And one of the simple things you can do is look at something like having apple cider vinegar or lemon juice in water before meals, like, probably about that much water. And, like a small glass, a small piece of water, diluted, and then use that to try and improve your stomach acid. If that's not doing enough, then you probably need to have a chat with a practitioner. Okay. Sea buckthorn. Yep, that's actually right, Tara. You're pretty close to spelling it. I think the buckthorn is actually one word. So have a look for that one. And thanks, Jenny. Jenny's given me the SMASH acronym. Sardines, mackerels, anchovies, salmon, and herring. See, I was struggling. Mackerel was coming up in my brain, but not the not the other one. All right. I'm just wondering if you can turn the mics on if people have any other questions. Annie? No? Okay, hold on. I shall
Yep,
stop.
I've just asked everybody to unmute. There we go. You should just be able to unmute yourselves, everyone. You can put your cameras on as well. Say hello and get personal.
And look, if you have to jump off to another meeting or another Zoom, please, I understand that, a lot of you are fitting in around lunch, and there should be a recording uploaded to the Natural Medicine Week website afterwards.
Absolutely.
So did anyone have any other questions and they're brave enough to speak up?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Uh, yeah, it's Patricia. Just wanted to ask about the nuts. You showed almonds. Are they the best nuts to have, or are you talking about any nuts like cashews and peanuts and what have you?
Look, typically I tend to prefer variety as much as possible. So, yes, almonds because they're easily, readily available, but also things like Brazil nuts, walnuts. I'm a huge fan of walnuts because, I think it's funny because walnuts actually look like a brain when you look at them as that size and shape. But also, I've been accused of only liking bougie nuts because there was um, I recommended to a client that they have activated walnuts. So I don't know if you're familiar with how you activate nuts, but basically you soak it for 24 hours in whey and Celtic sea salt, and then you dry them out or dehydrate them, and it keeps them for a really long period of time. And if you've ever had, and so the problem with a lot of nuts is that once they're open, they can go rancid and then they taste horrible and they're really not very. So I'd suggested to someone that they get these activated walnuts because they're really great. And there's a brand called To Die For that does them. However, I order them in with my organic order every week, and I am quite comfortable spending a lot on food because I really believe that, it's pay now or pay later, basically, with food. And I don't think I'd realized how expensive these activated walnuts were because they were just coming in my order every couple of weeks. And it was they said they thought $27 for 200 grams of nuts was a little bit, a little bit expensive. So they've actually had a dehydrator, so they're doing them themselves now. So I thought, oh, well, that's fine. But yes, apparently I recommend bougie nuts. So I thought that was funny. Were there any other questions that people had?
Hi, Christine. It's Louise. How are you?
Hi. Good.
Just with the SPM,
Yep.
I'm not familiar with that at all. So is that something people need to see a naturopath for, or can they access them over the counter?
Look, it's a good question. It's only been out for a couple of years. And I have to say, clinically, I've found it's a real gem. Really helping reduce inflammation. And I used it a lot for people post-COVID. So, because often people, if they were prone to anything, joints, aches and pains, they often would get really triggered through COVID. So what I would do is I'd put them on 3 a day for 2 weeks, and I'd find that would really help resolve that inflammation quite quickly. Now, there's two brands that I'm aware of who do it at the moment. There's Metagenics and BioClinic. And BioClinic do a really lovely one, which is Opti EPA DHA with SPMs. And I believe Bioceuticals are bringing one out, but I haven't seen the information on it yet. So that would probably be more an over-the-counter option. But I do think it's a really useful tool as a clinician. And it's made a lot of different, a lot of my clients have their little bag for, if they get COVID again, for products to actually really support them post. And the other thing I find the SPM is really useful for is brain fog. So that postmenopausal and also as people get older and other things. The other thing I find really invaluable for brain fog is getting the family to actually maintain their own schedules so that you don't have to try and remember what 4 people are supposed to be doing every day, which I find creates a lot of brain clutter for me. Anyway, that's another option. Great question. And look, it's really worthwhile seeing what they do because they are really, really helpful for, we do live in a fairly inflammatory environment. So anything that we can do. And it's interesting because I know someone mentioned a really good quality curcumin, but I do find with some people, curcumin can be really, it perhaps pushes their detox pathways too quickly and they get a lot of flushing. So in those people, you're probably better off looking at the omega-3s and the SPMs. So, I think we are very individual biochemically, and so different things will tend to work for you. And some people, You know, I had one client who really couldn't take any supplements, and the only thing that worked for her was a really strict anti-inflammatory diet. And she was in a real mess that I saw her again after a few years, and she basically said, you know, she went back on the anti-inflammatory diet, and after 6 days, she was like, oh, I feel like me again. But her body clearly couldn't cope with processed foods or, you know, supplements, or she was just really sensitive. Now, there was a question here about genetic testing like methylation. Look, again, I've been through a bit of a journey with genetic testing. When it first came out, I thought this is fantastic. And then I got the reports, and it was like 140 pages of gene snips with no information about how to treat it or manage it. And I'm not a geneticist, and I wasn't trained in that. So I found that not very useful. I have actually been using, there's a company called Fit Genes now that's doing some testing where it basically only looks at the genes that are nutritionally influenceable and kind of does a traffic light report. So it's green is you've got a good set, yellow is one of them is a bit bodgy, and red is, oh dear, you know. So, but here's the things we can do about it and what we can work on, because, you know, genes are just the terrain, the environment's the trigger. So if we can change things in the environment, whether it's nutritional or supplement or their lifestyle, you can actually make a big difference to how it expresses. And as much as possible, you know, I think a lot of people have those gene snips with MTFHR. So, you know, sometimes it is interesting to see what they can and can't cope with in terms of supplements. And it's not as simple as just going down an activated B. Biomedica, Daniel Baden wrote a really good paper on that if you want to go and have a look at it. But I probably don't have enough time to go into the detail that he did on folate metabolism pathways. So I think probably at this point, I'll probably just wrap up and say thank you to everyone for attending. I'm really happy that you could join us, and I'd love it if you could actually attend some of the other Natural Medicine Week events and find some things that are, you know, useful to support you and your health. And good luck with your practice, Louise.
Thanks all. See you at the next session. Bye.
Thank you.